Good morning, everyone. We're about to get started here. I want to thank you all for coming and participating with us today. We'll have the roll call by the secretary.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Eklund.
Excused.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Provenza.
Here.
Representative Schmidt.
Here.
Representative Strzok.
Here.
Chairman Winter.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'd like to just remind everyone of the, keep their phones down and try to, when you're testifying, to keep your questions and your testimony relevant. And also, if you address the chairperson at all times, we will start with House Bill 61, and Representative Dalton Banks will talk about that bill. Dalton.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So finally, I get to present what, well, hopefully is a non-controversial bill. So through the interim, this committee, well, actually, most of the interim since I've been here, we've heard about the issues we're dealing with, leases in the state lands. And on multiple occasions, there's been some landowners that have had some contentions because of lease issues. So hopefully this simple bill, what we're trying to do here is give the preference to the current leasee who is not in violation of the terms of their state land lease. These producers rely on these parcels for their livelihood, for their production, for their operations. And when we were talking about this in the committee, we kind of had the idea that they should have the preference over these parcels. You know, they've been taking care of it. They've been using it in their operations. And when it comes down to it, sometimes they get not the preference when it comes down to renewals, and this bill would make it so the current lessee gets the preference when it comes up to renewal. So with that explanation, that simple bill, I'll yield to the committee for questions.
Yes, thank you, Representative. Does the committee have any questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Banks, can you I haven't leased land for cattle before, so I'm just wondering if you could walk me through what the lease violations look like. Is it like lack of payment or other violations on that lease? Thank you.
Yeah, that's probably a better question for the state lands office. If there's no questions for me, Mr. Chairman, this might be a good time to bring them up.
Yes, thank you, Representative. Would the state lands come forward, please? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jason Crowder, Interim Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me, we have Cody Booth. He's our Assistant Director for our Trust Land Management Division. Appreciate this opportunity and happy to answer any questions that the committee has. As Representative Banks mentioned, it is a simple change to an existing statute that allows the preference to be given to existing lessees when they're renewing their lease if they're compliant with all the lease terms. To be honest, this is how we're currently operating. The way the bill changes the language is how we're currently operating. That if they are currently in violation of some lease term, Typically, that is if they're subleasing without approval, if they haven't made their payments on time. Could even be if they haven't grazed appropriately or in a husband-like manner, and we have them on a grazing plan. That could be a violation of the lease that we would be entertaining here. But in most cases, this revolves around subleasing without approval, and having that extra funding come to the lessee when by statute, half of that excess rental is supposed to come back to the board. So that's our typical infraction, and one of the examples I think that will be alleviated by this change, and we think it's a good change for this reason. When we get into a contested case hearing through the Office of Administrative Hearings, oftentimes attorneys on the opposing side will pick this up and say, it says in statute that they ever violated a term of the lease, then are they qualified for this preferred right to renew? And we have to explain that there may have been a violation in the past. There may have been a sublease that wasn't approved, but we rectified that. We rectified a grazing plan. And so now we believe them not to be in violation, but there's a little bit of conflict with the way the language currently reads. So that will clean up, or this language will clean up that situation when we're in those contested cases, that those attorneys and those hearing officers are just looking at current violations. And that's typically why we're in those hearings, is because there's a current violation. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? Yes. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crowder, are the violations common? Do you see a lot of common violations with these leases?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schmidt, it's not common. And it's certainly not common that it gets to the point where we have to address it at a lease renewal period. We've been very successful in conversations with our lessees to rectify situations. And a lot of times it's just a miscommunication or a lack of awareness on their side that we have to educate. Once we educate and they realize what needs to be done, they come into compliance very quickly. It's the very rare occasion when they're not. And to be honest and working with the committee over the last few interims, the language within the statute is relatively strict. And when we apply that to a renewing situation, there's a time period there where they have to clean up their infraction at a renewal point in the lease, and sometimes they simply don't have that time to be able to do it. One of the things that the Board of Land Commissioners has done to alleviate that situation is instead of all of those approvals going to the board at their next regularly scheduled meeting, which happens every 2 months and could really impact the timing of a renewal, they've brought that back to the director level. And so I'm able to approve those in a much more timely fashion. So when we do have a lessee who wants to correct their situation, they're not faced with the timing issue anymore, which we think will greatly reduce the amount of infractions that will impact renewals going forward.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. We'll now let the public testify at this time. Anyone interested in giving testimony, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. And we had been advocating for this change and certainly are supportive of it for the reasons that have been given to you. In what we had proposed, there was one additional word, and I'll put that out, and you should be interested in considering it. In violation of, I believe we're all sitting here and think that means a current violation, but to be more clear of inserting the word in and is not currently in violation of, just to make sure that any reader out there who's looking at this and considering challenging a lease renewal, that knows that it has to be a current violation at the time of renewal. I think that's implied here, but perhaps it could be clarified in that manner. But with that, Mr. Chairman, just offer our support to the bill and be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McGagnon. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes. Representative Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, if they are in violation, do you think this could still apply if they're in the process of working through, as the director had said?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, normally that, I mean, if they're in the this gets a little complex. If they've been made aware that they're in a violation and they're in the process of correcting it, and I've seen at least one example of this, but the state land office has not yet gotten to the point of accepting that correction, but the process is going forward, then I would hope that just some common sense would say, well, you know, they've proposed the remedy. If it's accepted by the director, it's probably okay. If it's something the director feels has to go before the board for some reason, then that's delayed because the board only meets every 2 months. And I suppose in response, as you could say, is not currently in violation or in the process of correcting a violation. I'm not sure that that's necessary, but that would address maybe your specific concern. But I think just some common sense on the part of both parties in most instances would address that issue.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. McGagnon.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. And I hope it doesn't scare him, but I think Mr. McGagnon has a good point. Adding that word currently, and I would also support adding some verbiage to deal with Representative Davis's. Putting it into the statute that makes it just more clear that, you know, if they're working to correct it, they shouldn't be denied a lease. So I would appreciate, I don't know how to word it, but I do appreciate Mr. McGagnon's suggested amendment, but sitting in favor of the bill, I would take any questions you or the committee may have.
Are there any questions from the committee? Mr. Moline. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, where, because I was looking at the introduction for the bill, where are you looking at putting the word currently? Where in the statute?
I think in the red language of what I have on my screen, right now, it's the suggested language is not in violation of, and I think not currently in violation of is what Mr. McGagnon suggested, correct me if I'm wrong. And then also, I think that would be an appropriate place, or is working to alleviate violations or verbiage along that line, that they're working towards correcting anything that they've, you know, I'd hate to see somebody get denied a lease for a very, very small inadvertent action, so.
Yes, thank you. I think the suggestion for currently would address that. Thank you.
Mr. Moline.
I think so too.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Mr. Moline?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public wanting to testify? How about the Game and Fish? Are they interested in testifying here? Okay. Okay. I would give you the chance anyway. Well, let's see, we should probably talk about this amendment proposal. Does anyone have a motion accordingly?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would just want to ask Mr. Crowder if he's okay with that, adding in currently right there.
Mr. Crowder, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the word currently is a good clarification. That's how we're interpreting it anyway, so adding it doesn't have a problem. I would like to address the second idea of are you currently working through it, which is an okay thought process. There are situations where we don't have a good lessee. There are situations where they do need to work through an extra process with us and may not be successful at the end of that because they're not a good lessee. And unfortunately, that does happen. One of the things that the board did when they moved that approval down to the director level was give some criteria One is that they have to be compliant with all lease terms before I can approve it. If they're not compliant or they can't get in compliance, then we have to move that up a level for board consideration. The other is it has to be in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries. So there could be a situation, and Cody and I could not think of one right off the top of our head where that would be the case, where we'd have to move it up to the board for consideration. So those things put in place, we're going to approve everything that comes through that is a good actor, somebody who's going to be moving forward and doing the process right. But if they are eligible for the preferred right to renew just because they're working through a process and may not be successful at the end of that process, that may give the committee a little bit of pause. There should be a compliant lessee per the statute that is eligible for this preferred right to renew their lease. But if they're not a good lessee, and if they're not eligible for this preferred right, just because they're working on it may not rise to the level of giving them that preference. And again, I remind the committee, the preference is to match the highest bid from somebody else. It's not to renew the lease. They're going to be able to renew their lease if there's no conflicting bid. The preference is simply you get to participate in that second bidding process if a conflicting bid comes in. And again, that doesn't happen very often, maybe 10 or 15 times a year, so out of 4,000 leases. So just leave that with you, Mr. Chairman, and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Any more questions for Mr. Crowder? I have one. Is it your opinion that the second suggestion may not be necessary then, that came from the Farm Bureau?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a policy decision for the committee, certainly. I do think that when the office reviews all the applications coming in, we do our best to get them in a situation where they're eligible for the preferred right to renew. Even if they are a habitual bad actor, we want to get them in compliance. That's our core mission. Board of Land Commissioners has the same desire and mission to make sure that they are in compliance with lease terms and doing everything that the lease requires, grazing in a husband-like manner, taking care of their improvements, and ultimately benefiting the beneficiaries. So those two checks and balances, if the lessee will meet those, and we think they're reasonable and they're within the lease terms, then they're going to be eligible for the preferred right to renew. And so with that message to you, I guess, it's a policy decision if you want that to be a thing. We feel like it's already there, I believe.
Okay, thank you. And it's my understanding there is no public online. Oh, Representative Davis, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your opinion, Director, you would just soon handle this in the rules that are in the office instead of addressing this in statute?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Banks, I think my message to you is that we feel it's already in rules. People are being approached now for violations or deficiencies in the process, and they're either responding or they're not. And they could be responding at a much lower level than they should be, but the existing rules allow us and the Board of Land Commissioners to work with them to get them into compliance, and it's really on them. If they don't want to come into compliance, then they won't, and they won't be eligible for that. But giving them the eligibility for a preference just because they're working on that is something you should consider.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Representative Davis, are you satisfied then with? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I would ask Mr. Moline a question here. Would you mind coming back up, please? Yeah, Mr. Moline, I just wanted to make sure that you were satisfied with the response we got from the state and from our Representative Davis regarding this potential amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I am satisfied. I slightly disagree, but I think this bill puts us in a much better spot than what we are currently, so I would still support the bill.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Appreciate it. Okay. Ms. Johnson, I say you just come in. Do you have comments on this particular bill? On bill number 61, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, moved by Representative Davis and second by Representative Ottman. Is there any discussion on this? Representative Banks.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make an amendment at this time, and I move that we amend this bill to include on line 3, the word currently, so that it would read, starting on line 2, and is not currently in violation of the provisions of the lease.
I second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that that amendment be agreed to. Do we have do we need a roll call on this? Okay. Any discussion?
Chairman. You just do a vote, a vocal vote, not individually. And I missed who did the motion and the second for the vote to call in question.
Okay, you do have that information, who made the motion and who is
I
second?
don't,
You don't?
no.
Okay. Representative Banks made the motion
Okay,
and Representative Strzok
thank you.
seconded. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Further discussion?
She called the question.
Okay, the question's been called for. Want to have the roll call vote then?
You bet. We're voting on House Bill 61 with the amendment. Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Davis. Aye. Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Schmidt.
Aye.
Representative Strzok.
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
This bill passes with the amendment, 9-0.
Thank you, committee. The motion has passed of a 9-0 vote. So we'll go on to our next bill. Thank you for those who have been here for this bill, and come again when you can. So our next bill for consideration today is House Bill 21, or 221, I'm sorry. Would Representative Ottman wish to bring this bill forward? Explanation.
I would, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Committee, Mr. Chairman and committee, I bring to you today House Bill 221. Basically, this is a bill to repeal a duplicative effective date. And that's primarily all it is. There was 2 dates that were duplicated. And so we wanted to fix that and make it better for everybody involved. So I do have Director Bruce from Game and Fish, or you're going to call for testimony, right? So I would just, I would ask that you vote for this great bill.
Thank you, Representative Ottman. Okay, would the agencies like to come up that are, want to testify on this bill? Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, committee members. Angie Bruce, Director of Wyoming Game and Fish, and with me today is Doug Brimmeyer, my Deputy Director. So yeah, this bill seems pretty simple and straightforward, but the topic is not. And if you recall, Senate File 118 last year was talked about very extensively. So this is a slight amendment to that statute that went through last year to amend it, as Representative Altman described. But just to give you a brief synopsis of the situation to refresh your memory, this is really related to the Sweetwater Rocks area and wild sheep. Currently, there are no wild sheep that we manage in that area. However, there's been interest over the years, I think maybe 3 decades, of putting sheep back in that area to manage them. And part of that management, as what happened is we had landowners come to the commission and ask us to look at this issue about 3 years ago. And as we dive into the issue, there is a lot of concerns with sheep in the area for our landowners especially. We have in the state, we're very fortunate to have a bighorn sheep, domestic sheep working group. So a committee that works on these issues meets regularly, and that committee and their plan is in state law. And so anything that we do within that framework. So what this does is it removes, it basically makes the sentence in there that says this statute is ineffective until federal law is enacted. It removes the date, excuse me, I'm saying this wrong. So really, why is this needed? So we're looking at it, removing it to, so that it is effective not until there's federal protections in place. And so why do we need those federal protections in place? So again, no sheep are in the area, but if everything aligns and the department would recommend to the commission that we would like sheep to move forward to translocate sheep to the Sweetwater Rocks area, if the commission gives us direction to go ahead. If we choose to do this, this current statute would do 2 things. It protects the landowners from any movement by the federal government to alter the federal land leases that affect their operation. So let me give you an example. A lot of the landowners out there have BLM grazing leases. If they were to modify how those are operated because there's wild sheep then in the area, this law would give them protections. What would happen is, in state law, it says that the Game and Fish would go in there and remove the sheep. But then what we're also asking for is the work on federal legislation to give those protections as well. So we really see this federal protection really needed, very wide and encompassing, that says BLM, Forest Service, whoever it may be, a federal land manager in the state, needs to defer to that state Wyoming plan in how we manage sheep, so that they could not do something differently. And therefore, those landowners would not be penalized by any sheep being put into the area. So definitely the department, this is a lot riding on that federal legislation, right? But the department has already started communication, as well as several others, with our federal delegation. And I think the stars are aligned that we can hopefully get that done. This issue goes beyond Sweetwater Rocks. It really goes beyond just that area. It goes beyond sheep, to be honest. But if we can get federal language that says, refer to the state's plan, we're going to be stronger in all of our plans throughout the state when it comes to the federal government. So I know that was a lot. There's a lot going on with this, but this is a tweak in the bill to better align with what we're hearing the needs are for this project in that area.
Okay.
So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Banks.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So if I remember the debate from last year, that language was included because if the feds didn't enact anything, it gave the state the ability to do that. And so now the way I read it is, now it's just subject to the feds. Am I correct in that assumption?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, that's how I believe it is. The intent of it is The bill removes that date and statute and formalizes protections once that federal law is in place. So you're exactly right. Yep.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, the process with the federal, okay? That seems to be the big holdup. If I remember what the good representative was talking about earlier, the reason why we put that in there was try to force something out of the federal government, so they're just not sitting on their hands for another 2 decades or 1 decade or whatever, so am I right in that assumption?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, you're testing my memory a little bit. I think some of that intent was there to say, step up and do something here. But, the actions of the federal government, if we could control those, we would all be a lot better off. So, the thought would be is that we would work towards that. And now with this language taken out is we have to work towards that in order for this to be enacted. The way the language was in before, it was sort of like, we want the federal action, but if it doesn't happen, this is still in effect. So now the idea is we need the federal action.
Follow up, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
go ahead.
So the federal action that we're talking about, would that entail a NEPA or something along those lines? Which, give me a time frame that we're looking at some federal action. What you think would be the best scenario?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, good question. Our initial conversations with our federal delegation, we're already having those. We're going to really dive into it and focus in after this legislative session, probably March. As you know, at the federal level, committee chairs and everything is just getting ironed out. Talking to them a lot about other subjects as well, like grizzly bears and sage grouse. So we're letting the federal committees get worked out so we know the best path of who to help us with that. But timeline, it's going to take a while. They are very knowledgeable about the subject. They've been coming, the delegation's representatives have been coming to the meetings, so they're well aware of the subject and ready to help us. But I'm imagining it's not going to happen anytime soon. It will probably take a year or so. And we would also be looking at some sort of federal law. It wouldn't happen in a planning process like NEPA. It would be federal law that would be needed.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, and then what I got from you, if it's only a year or so, that January 1st, 26 isn't that far out of line then, is it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, maybe not. Yeah.
One more question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Do you feel that, well, I would hope you feel that the Game and Fish is adequately equipped to do this? And, just like you mentioned the grouse area, I just keep getting a little pushed back from the federal level that, they're dictating policy on a number of sensitive issues. And, maybe, and luckily, maybe the new administration will have a turning point there, so. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond, yeah, so we wouldn't want them to, I think this would be federal law put in place so that they wouldn't dictate management of those sheep in the area. Instead, the federal law would say something like, federal land managers would refer to the state and the state's plan when it comes to bighorn sheep management. So we're really looking for it to put in federal statute to defer to the state and make that clear to their agencies.
So, Director, you are planning to do that, to work that direction then?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely, working with our governor's office very closely and other partners, because I think it will take a lot of us to help voice what's needed at the federal level. So once we get that language in the path we're going to take ironed out, we will be reaching out to folks to help us with that.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Thank you.
Representative Strong.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry to have to say this, I'm extremely confused now why we needed this bill and if it weakened what we had before. I'm not understanding why we have this bill if it's weakened it, why we're even doing this. So I think unless I get some clarification, I'm probably going to be a no on this because I feel like we've just taken away some things, a tool in our box for the state and handed it back to the federal government. So I'm really confused here.
Okay. Representative Ottman.
Mr. Chairman and Ms. Bruce, thank you so much because there's a lot in here and we had a lot of discussions. One of the things that brought, and to answer your question, one of the things that brought this to my attention and why this bill is here is because of a meeting that I attended in Jeffrey City. There was a lot of landowners there. Director Bruce was there online, and there was a lot of concern because the procedures that the Game and Fish follows of public meetings and all of those things was being streamlined. And so the landowners are in agreement. I mean, they all know that lands are public and things like that, and wild animals and things. And there is a process. Those people have been in that area for years and years and years and years. And they either own privately or graze, have leases of many, many thousands of acres. And so this is a concern of theirs, and they do, I believe, work very well with the department. The reason that I brought this bill is because when we looked at the bill that was passed last year, it says this act is effective not later than 15 days after applicable federal law is enacted and the Attorney General certifies to the Secretary of State that federal law has been enacted that aligns with the purposes of this act. And as the director specified, is those, with this election, things are getting ironed out. Who is going to do what? So then the second part of that, if no federal law is enacted that aligns with the purposes of this act is effective January 1st. So what that said to the landowners is, and a lot of other people, myself included, is that if the federal government didn't do anything, this automatically was streamlined. So the public meetings and the public consent and the things that we go along with when we're making determinations like this could just be totally ignored. And so by taking this date out, that process that the Game and Fish goes through with all kinds of things, and we've said that there has been introduction over the last 30 years, twice, of two herds that are non-existent anymore. It didn't work. So all of those things are just to work together with the position of the wild sheep, with the position of the domestic sheep, with the concerns there of crossover and disease, with all of those things. The reason this bill is here is to make sure that the process that the Game and Fish normally follows, and the landowner, because there's over 20 landowners in there, their participation, that all just follows protocol and that it's done well and in agreement with everybody. So.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just nuts and bolts, I guess, to try and answer your question. When you look up the session law from 2024 that we're referring to, which I think what can be confusing is we're not referring to the statute, we're referring to the session law. So when you pull it up, it was previously Senate File 118. So you can look up from 2024 how you voted on Senate File 118. What this does is it deletes Section 5, which is the enacting clause. So this bill, like what we passed last year, that had broad support would not be effective any longer, to my understanding, until it's like a trigger, basically. So the feds would have to step in and do something because we are deleting the enacting clause from the statute from last year that we passed.
Representative Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. So honestly, so everything we've done now, we just sit here and wait for the federal government to make a decision. So we're essentially putting it in their hands now. Granted, we like who took office and hope would be good, but we're still leaving it in their hands.
Representative Strzok, it's my understanding that the Game and Fish will be heavily involved in this and be pushing the federal government to get something done. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we will. And let me take a step back because I hear what you're saying. I think the question is when do you want this to be effective? Do you want it to be effective now or based on federal legislation? If you have it in effect now, not that we have a plan to translocate sheep, but if we did, it offers protections to the landowners through state law. And so if we wait to have it effective, those protections in state law don't happen to those landowners until the federal statute becomes in place. So I think that's maybe the question before you is, when do you want this effective?
Representative Davis.
Director, maybe you can or can't answer this question, but how many domestic sheep are out there currently that that seems to be the big push between the wild sheep and the domestic sheep? How many, are they active permits or not active permits?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question, Mr. Chairman, Representative. So how many domestic sheep are in this area now? Is that your question? Yeah, do you have a good sense of that, Deputy?
Yes. Mr. Chairman and Representative Davis, so from the Jeffrey City meeting, I think that some folks brought up that there's a few hobby flocks around in that area that we've got identified as the kind of the restoration area for that sheep herd. There's no public allotments with domestic sheep in that area at this point. And we evaluated out to a certain distance, and there's nothing in close proximity. But again, there's a couple different hobby flocks where people have 4-H lambs and things like that that are pretty isolated from, what would be exposed to the wild sheep. But no sheep allotments that I'm aware of.
Thank you. So that answers a big question, that should this go forth, if the permits aren't currently, they're still tagged that, are they, and I know you don't know this answer, are they trying to be turned over into cattle AUMs and stuff like that, what the process of the landowners are out there? And then, again, could you tell me how many landowners were involved in this, that within where you're going to put this?
I don't have a good answer for that one.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, we have a list of landowners. Probably, it depends on, again, the exact area, if this were to go forward, isn't completely defined yet. But I'm looking at Representative Altman. She probably knows better than me. I know at the landowner meeting, maybe 40 landowners were there. Would that be fair to say? How many are actually in the area? A lot less than that 40. But there's still a reason for them to be concerned because sheep move. And so there is a heightened concern. I think it's just more of their concern, if I can try to speak for the landowner, which again, I'm not. But their concern is just what's out of their control, which is that federal land lease on BLM. And even though they may not have sheep today, maybe they'll have sheep in the future because there are sheep allotments there. Or we do know that we've had past circumstances where the federal government has restricted grazing leases based on wild sheep and other species. So I think that fear is there and that fear is real. So again, really support working on that federal language. a little bit of this preview of the bill. Again, the bill's pretty simple, but it's really not, right? So I think that question goes back to what the representative said over here is, when do you want it effective? It's currently effective, even though we're not, moving sheep at this time. Or do you want it dependent upon when the federal government puts, if they do, federal language, and then you want it effective? I think there is a case to be made of having it effective today, because it puts that protection in the state's hands. The states represent the landowners today. And if it's not effective, then the state does not. So I hope that helps clarify. Okay.
One more follow-up, please, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
go ahead.
So at the public meeting, and you kind of alluded to it, it's a chosen area that these sheep would be introduced into. So there should be just a select amount of landowners, you know? So it seems to me that if there was 40 people there, are there 40 landowners that are directly impacted by this? Do we know that number? Who is directly impacted?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative, I say it's directly impacted in a probable foreseeable area is much smaller than that, and maybe more like a dozen landowners.
Thank you.
Okay, Doug, would you state your name and for the record, please?
Yeah, Doug Braymeyer, and I'm a Deputy Director with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the Game and Fish from our committee? Okay, seeing none, I appreciate you coming, and if you can stick around, we might need to ask you another question or two. Does someone have a question here?
Mr. Chairman, not so much for Game and Fish, but Representative Ottman. I
Okay,
had a
go
quick
ahead.
question for her. You're close to this, been close to this. So the landowners that you're familiar with there, that you've been dealing with, are okay with this, putting this in effect, this protection now for them through the state, with the state?
Representative
Mr.
Ottman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, what I would say is that the reason that this came up is because the landowners were all of a sudden being told that this is going to happen, and they were very concerned. The landowners, as far as the meetings that I have gone to and with the department and not, the landowners are very willing to work along with this, but they want to be involved, and they want to know that their voices are being heard. The department has agreed to that wholeheartedly and said, yes, that's the procedure that we would follow, because they take into consideration those people that are affected there. This was brought, if I am correct, this was brought to fruition because someone said, I would like to put wild sheep here. And, okay, so that was moved forward, but now we're going through the process of who all does that affect? And is this the best place, and is this the best time? And so as we step through the process of looking at all of that and getting all of that information, that's what we're trying to do by saying it is not a go whether you participate or not. We will follow the way that that we do things well here in Wyoming is having the public involved in things that concern them. And it's not saying it won't go, but it's saying that it'll be an agreement and everybody will have a voice that has their livelihoods and their lands affected. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ottman. Representative Strzok, are you satisfied with what's been going on here, the comments? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Game and Fish. Oh, Representative Davis again.
One more question for the good director here. So, excuse me, if I understand you correct, as long as your agency is involved in this process, then we have cooperating status with the federal government. If we remove this date and timeline, then you take a back seat, so then these landowners do not have any representation going forth because they do not have cooperating status. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, the cooperating status is maybe a federal term that I don't like to use in state government. So I would say that how the statute is today, without the change, gives them that protections. My previous director, Director Nesvik, wrote a letter to the landowners that talked about if we put sheep there and the federal government weaponizes that, to be simple, then we would remove them. And that was a strong letter, but it was a letter. And so last year you guys debated and that got put in a statute to say, we will come remove them and the state protects you. So that's pretty powerful. But it's like Representative Altman said, is the landowners want really good assurances of protection to move forward. So this gives the state protection. And so we're working on the federal, the other piece of it. But if this language as the bill drafted today is removed, that state protection will not go into effect until the federal protection does. So again, our intent as the department is not to move forward until we have the federal protection as well. So it may be a moot point, but it's just to clarify how those two work with each other. Does that help?
Mr. Chairman, yes and no, because, private landowners don't really have the ability that is offered from the state's
Yeah.
So it would seem to me with the expertise in the agency that we would be better represented than as a group of loose ranchers out there running around.
Mr. Chairman, if I could try again.
Yes, go
I do
ahead.
understand the representative's comment or question now. He's very familiar with the federal land management process known as NEPA. And when we go through NEPA, so any land planning, such as Rock Springs RMP, such as Sage Grouse, all the ones you guys are familiar with, the state agencies as well as the counties are cooperator status. So we're at the table when we form those plans. As we have learned with Rock Springs RMP, that doesn't always mean everything. But that is our attempt. We're right there at the table. But private folks, landowners, NGOs in the room aren't given that status. They are not at the table when a plan is formed. So you're right, the landowners are not cooperators on any sort of future plan in the area. It would have to be the counties or the state to represent them.
So are we clear here? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, folks. Are there any other agencies that would like to testify?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Chris Wickman. I'm the manager of the Natural Resources and Policy Division with the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. And I agree with everything that Director Bruce has said. Providing assurances from the federal level is important. And some clarification on the bill of protecting the landowners. The way I remember the bill from last year, it's a reactionary bill also. There would have to be a negative impact from the federal agencies to those federal permittees, lessees, before the state's law kicks in. So I think the assurances is the state has done a good job to provide assurances on the state level. But this is BLM lands that we're talking about, BLM grazing leases, that they don't have the federal assurances to do that. I think the way I recall it was, it's a reactionary bill that if a negative decision on those federal grazing permits happen, then this law kicks in also. So we support 100% to work on the language on the federal, with our federal delegation. I think that's important, but just provide that clarification.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any questions for the agency? Would you state your name again, please?
Yeah, it's Chris Wickman, Wyoming Department of Ag.
Do you spell your last name, please?
WICHMANN.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you for being here. Did you get that, Secretary? Okay. Thank you. I guess there's no more agencies. We'll open the testimony up to the public in the room. Would anyone like to address the issue here? Good morning. Would one of you state your name and who you represent for us, please?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You caught me deer in headlights coming in for the last bill, but this is the bill I was here to comment on. I'm Jess Johnson. I'm with the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. The Wyoming Wildlife Federation actually sits on this working group that the director talked about. We've sat on it pretty much since its inception and have really looked at being at the table on how we can be in good faith working with ag and landowners on how we move forward with this, because it is a very contentious issue. And this bill was the product, or the bill that this is sort of effectively gutting. So Senate File 118 last year was the product of a lot of sort of back and forth and a lot of work with other ag groups as well as other wildlife groups to come to a little bit like, how do we put our best foot forward? How do we offer protections? Because we're a hunting group. We would love to see bighorn sheep in the Sweetwater Rocks. I'm a sheep hunter. I would love to see sheep in my backyard. I live in Lander. So it is certainly, that is what we would love to see, but we're, wanting to do this in the best way possible to offer the protections there. So this bill that came up last year, Senate File 118 last year, offers that. It is offering the protections, and it was in very good faith. It was vetted through ag groups. It was worked on by many other people. So this was not a gotcha moment. This was not a forced reintroduction. This does not press go on reintroduction in any way, shape, or form. And so what we're looking at here and what we're hearing is that they do not want these protections with this bill that is currently in front of you. So the bill that is currently in front of you guts those protections that are offered here. And I think a senator came to the senator that carried this bill last year came to the landowner meeting. I was also in that meeting. And there was concern. There was concern for all grazing rights, not just sheep and cattle. It was very, folks were concerned, and we really hear that. And something that the senator said that has stuck with me, that he mentioned to them as well, is that who right now represents those landowners in a fight with the BLM? It's their own attorneys. It's whoever they have to pay to get there. This bill goes into action. Who then represents them in a fight with the BLM? It's the state attorney general. It's Bridget Hill. So this offers so much more protection for them if they get into that legal fight. And I thought that the senator made a really great point in that. I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him from that meeting. I think that is really where we're at with this, is we want to do this in good faith. We don't want to shove this down people's throats. We want to be at the table and make sure those protections are there. From Wyoming Wildlife Federation's perspective, we are in good faith also working with the federal legislation. We have been on Zoom meetings, crafting language that we're all comfortable with. We believe in the federal legislation as well. But this is the state's go at it. So it's offering protections whether that federal legislation comes down or not. And that is something that I find really important, because it's not always certain that those federal legislations is gonna come through and offer that. So that's sort of how we're approaching this from our view, and we're really here to work and protect those landowners. We do not want to have a gotcha moment. We do not want to have grazing leases that are revoked in any kind. I mean, we look at what big, large working landscapes mean for wildlife. That's important, and we're here to help protect that. So this is not one of those moments where we're just trying to slide in under the table and, get something done. I wanted to make sure that that was very heard. And we're here to work with them. And if they do not want those protections, I think that's up to them and up to you guys to make that decision. But that was sort of the intent that we brought with that bill. And this bill that is in front of you currently revokes that.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Provenza.
Ms. Johnson, thank you, Ms. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, have you worked with federal delegation before on other legislation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I have. About 9 years ago, I was hired with the Wyoming Wildlife Federation, or maybe 10 years ago now, to work on something called the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative, to look at wilderness study areas and whether we designate them as wilderness or not. And I sat on a lot of the working groups, and I helped coordinate the Sporting Voice that was input to counties around that. It is currently just now moving through the Senate.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
That was my question. I mean, I think oftentimes a group of 12 landowners is overlooked when we're talking about state law. And so I was just curious, your experience working in federal law, because I imagine it's, Wyoming on steroids. So it's, my question is, how likely is it that, we might be working with our delegation, but how likely is it that that's going to move through their process and pass for 12 landowners in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, there's a couple answers in that. We're in a really unique situation where our national delegation has a lot of power. So that is going to be different now than it was, say, 9 years ago. We have someone that sits as a majority whip on that says something. We also have a national delegation that's interested and has kept a very kind ear to this issue. I'm sorry, there was a second question in there.
How likely is it they're going to listen? Mr. Chairman, how likely is it that an entire federal government, because it has to go through the same process that we have, that the rest of the federal government is going to be concerned about our landowners here?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think that's a fair question. We are looking at it, there has been discussion that we would not like it just to look at the Sweetwater Rocks area, but statewide in Wyoming. So that does sort of bring a more state's perspective to it, and not just the 12 landowners. We're sort of seeing like how that looks statewide. That does sort of change that. But again, when you're looking at just you look at the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative bill, it does move slowly when it's just a state or it's a couple parts of a state. But I am pretty hopeful. We have a really powerful delegation. They've been incredibly open to listening. And I know that there are other states that are sort of leaning an ear towards this discussion, because Wyoming is the only state with a bighorn sheep plan. That is unique to this state, and it is something that we've all worked very hard to make sure that we're still at the table to do. It's the reason that we're talking about Sweetwater Rocks reintroduction at all. So there is a lot of eyes on this. It's not just a small issue, but I do think it's a fair thing to say that, it is hard to get, especially even if it's just a state level thing.
Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate what you were saying, because I found that meeting very interesting. And that was one of the reasons why I asked the landowners about, what did they know and how things were progressing, and why I talked to the department, because in that meeting, it was pretty much said that this is going to happen and we will work with you to make it the best.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the way that we should introduce things into different parts of our state. Is just saying we're going to do it. So that's what I heard, and that's the whole purpose of why I brought this. Not that I don't like them, or not that the landowners don't, but that there's a lot of pieces and parts, and that to bring it in to be advantageous for a hunting opportunity, rather than to look at the entire resource and what that does, was my concern. And so that's why we brought this, and there is nothing stopping that bill or this from coming back or being better. But like you said, the federal delegation is working, and they'll be in our corner. What I was concerned with is it said if no federal law is enacted, it just goes into effect automatically. So what if like the Lance Initiative, what if those voices aren't heard yet? What of all those things, that would have automatically been put in, and then we'll deal with the consequences, which could be crossing the border. And it's like the cost and what would happen is said, we will remove those animals immediately. The cost to the state of performing that and doing that is pretty darn high. And just to think about, okay, we're gonna put some sheep in here and it should work, but if it doesn't, we'll remove them. And what we've seen with other herds is that some of them are just shot. And so that's what we're trying to do, is just to say, slow down and let the process that is normal through the state go through, because yeah. So anyways, that was the whole purpose of the bill. What these land owners have lots of different issues with it. There's also private property in there that affects different things, but I won't do that. So anyways, I appreciate your testimony, and I'm glad, however the committee decides, but this needed to be brought out for people to see and to consider, and not just to be pushed through. So I thank you.
Mr. Chairman, slight point of order here.
Yes.
I think we need to keep away from a back and forth and try and focus on just questions related to public comment when we have this, just to keep it clean.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Representative Banks. Are we clear? Yes, we are. Okay, thank you.
Is there, I heard a little bit of a question in there, but I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, if I should go forward to answer it, or if that was.
Do you have a question, Representative Altman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you have a point of clarification, or if she does, to answer my comments, that would be appreciated, sure.
Ms. Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, some of this, when we look at when this bill came in, we're talking about reintroduction of sheep into Sweetwater Rocks. Sheep are currently in the Ferris Seminoles, which is 7 miles, 2 miles, 2 miles from the rocks. These sheep are foraying out. They move. And we have been doing, and by we, I mean UW and many other wildlife researchers have put a ton of time on the ground doing research on if this place warrants having sheep. Sweetwater Rocks, they had an incredible sort of suitability study on the habitat and where these sheep are going to go and how they're going to stay there. There's even discussion to do another piece of research that looks at how they move on the landscape, so we can help plan for how these sheep are going to behave when they come down. There's a ton of science on this. So it's not just dropping sheep out of the air into a place we think looks good. There's been decades at this point of science put on the ground on this. And we finally have this foraying group of sheep that are at this point at objective and starting to expand out in the Ferris Seminoles. It's the reason we held a ewe hunt. We would love to not have to hold a ewe hunt and to take those ewes and put them somewhere else so we can expand our bighorn sheep population. But we're certainly not going to do that in any kind of push it down a throat kind of way. So we've been putting the science into place and we've been doing the disease research, and there's been all of this work. And I say we, and I'm looking over here, it's these guys with the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation that are doing the lion's share of that, as well as the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. But as we are sitting at this table as Wyoming Wildlife Federation, we're looking at like, are all these boxes checked? You know, is the biological habitat suitable? What are we looking at for the suitability of social carrying capacity? That's what we're struggling with now. And we're trying to put that social capital on the ground by offering these protections. These protections also go into effect if those sheep foray over and just naturally move into Sweetwater Rocks. That is also something that can happen. They're 2 miles away, and this protection offers it in that instance as well. So it's a lot more of like, are we checking all these boxes? This bill was part of that, trying to say, hey, yeah, we hear you. You need protections. The federal bill is another box that we're going to have to check and be there. But this offers that protection in the instance of a natural foray, like, you know, and they started to establish a population there. This bill offers that protection in that instance too, where we have done no reintroduction and they're only 2 miles away. So sheep may move different, they may not go. There's a road there that's a pretty good roadblock, so they may not do that at all, but you know, there's an offer there that it could happen. But that was the sort of clarity of making sure that like, this was not just a, you know, out of the blue, put sheep into Sweetwater Rocks. There's been decades of work on it.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Johnson? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask this question just because you spoke so extensively about bighorn sheep. By relocating or propose this relocation in Sweetwater Rocks, you've got sheep 2 miles away in the Ferris Range. Are you creating a problem? Because if you put sheep in Sweetwater Rocks, wild critters have pretty good noses and they're going to find each other. So what kind of problems are you going to create by doing that, by introducing these sheep into Sweetwater Rocks? Is it going to be a direct effect on exactly kind of what we're talking about here today in landowners and their concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schmidt, I'm going to give a short answer, but I'm going to say that the department is probably far more qualified to answer that question than I am. Part of that suitability study was asking, like, you know, what does the kind of habitat look like? What we're finding is the Sweetwater Rocks area is a sheep paradise. It's, you know, we are not expecting them to leave something like that. I think that's a fair question, but as far as the probability and are we creating a problem, we wouldn't have gotten this far if we thought that that was the case. Dr. Monteith with the university did an extensive study. I am happy to send that into your inboxes so you guys can take a look at what that looks like. And I'm also going to defer that question to these two to my left because they're probably going to know that better than I am. But what I can tell you is if we had an inkling that that was going to be the case, we would not be sitting here today.
Okay. Any more questions? Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, you folks.
Mr. Chairman, committee, thank you so much for having us here this morning. My name is Katie Cheesebro. I am the executive director of the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. And I want to kind of bring it back to the bill a little bit here. We kind of got off of this, but I think what's important is the director spoke about the Domestic Bighorn Sheep Interaction Working Group. And this is a group that has been working on these types of situations for over 20 years. And in 2015, the Wyoming plan was codified and the meeting of this group was mandated by statute. And so this is a legislatively recognized group. And I just want to address the thought or perception that any of this was streamlined, because it wasn't. This proposal was brought forth in 2021 by a landowner in the area, and this group has been meeting for about 4 years discussing this, and these are public meetings, and perhaps they weren't well enough brought to the public so that the public could know, but we truly believed that the landowners in this area were being represented in the room by the different groups who are signatories to this plan. And there's several ag groups, several wildlife groups, and we absolutely thought everyone was being represented. So as we worked through these, Senate File 118 from 2004 or 2024 was actually brought to the Interaction Working Group and was developed cooperatively between the ag groups and the wildlife groups. And it was brought through that process that is in statute. So there is a process in the Wyoming plan of how to bring about a reintroduction proposal and how we work through that as a group. And we have been doing that for 4 years. So in no way has this been streamlined, but I do think that perhaps something is broken if those landowners felt that they were not aware, were not part of that discussion. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then, yes, the other aspect of this is the rest of that original legislation, which provides protections to those landowners should sheep migrate to the area naturally. And if this amendment goes through, they lose those protections, which, I mean, honestly, no skin off my back. But I think the intent here is to protect our neighbors and to go into this, as Jess mentioned, in a spirit of cooperation and to make something that works well. And the Ferris Seminole herd that currently has sheep about 2 miles away is a product of translocation. It's currently the healthiest herd in the state. And with the disease issues and all that's affecting wild sheep, it's important that we have distinct populations. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Cheeseborough? Seeing none, do you have anything to say?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and introduce yourself and who you work for.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Matt Hubler. I'm a board member of the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. I, for 6 years, was the Chief Operating Officer of Pathfinder Ranches, and I'm one of the 2 authors of the reintroduction proposal from 2021 when I worked for Pathfinder Ranch. As we've mentioned, the original bill, Senate File 118, it was, as Katie and Jess have expressed, jointly developed. It passed out of both houses, both sides with majority. The governor signed it. At that time, those protections were discussed of when they would be enacted. And the discussion centered around, yes, 1, a translocation of wild sheep, but 2, as you've heard, the movement of wild sheep on their own. The Sweetwater Rocks is currently designated as a cooperative review area under the Wyoming plan. Therefore, has that potential, should sheep move in there, to be cooperatively reviewed as to the herd objectives. This current bill, House Bill 221, makes it so that all the work, all the protections that would be for ag producers are not enacted until federal legislation occurs. And as I've listened to voices of the Wyoming people and here within this legislative body this session, it seems to me that there's voices that suggest we want less federal involvement in our life. And so I find it a little ironic that we're going to put the decision of when protections will exist for Wyoming ranchers at the hands of just the federal government. Senate File 118 did not authorize a wild sheep relocation. It did not. It was an agricultural bill that would just enact protections. From the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation perspective, we're going to continue to work with landowners statewide, landowners in the Sweetwater Rocks, whether they're private landowners only or hold BLM grazing leases, as well as our federal land managers, where we have common ground related to ag production and wild sheep habitat. Our foundation gives away $150,000 to $300,000 a year on such projects as cheatgrass removal, water developments, livestock and wildlife-friendly fencing, domestic sheep, wild sheep disease research, habitat and rangeland improvements. The last 5 years of our grant awards are on our website, and I encourage you all to look at them to see where Wyoming wild sheep and ag production complement each other. During my time at Pathfinder, we had 26 BLM allotments that I managed. 5 of them were in the Ferris Seminole area. When Pathfinder acquired the property, 2 of those allotments were in suspension. We had suspended AUMs due to past misuse. When I left, neither were in suspension in the areas that were both BLM permits and wild sheep habitat. And I will guarantee you, and would love to show every one of you personally, the water developments that occurred for livestock in those areas, the habitat that we, fenced off the spring but developed the spring for livestock water. That's the kind of work that can occur on the ground when we work collectively towards a common goal. And so, if I may, the landowner meeting that Representative Ottman has spoke about, that was not a public meeting. That was an invite only. 4 of your largest landowners, large by private land as well as by BLM grazing leases, were not invited nor in the room. I speak of Pathfinder, I speak of Split Rock, I speak of the Handcart Ranch. We'd love to meet with you guys. And I say that from a wild sheep standpoint because if you go back to my original letter from 2021, and it's on the Wyoming Wild Sheep website, you will see the sentence, "We don't want wild sheep to enter these areas at the demise of the ag industry." I wrote that 4 years ago, and I stand by it today. We can work together. Let's continue this process of common conversation. And if wild sheep or federal legislation or whatever the future is going to hold, but I'm thankful that we still have that mission and we still have willing landowners around the state where we can continue to keep and put wild sheep on the mountain. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my one question, since some of these ranchers are fearful of SF 118, I do believe it put a law of protection. But what would happen when we do meet up with the federal government and they start working all this again? Would some of that, can it be worked through? As I guess what I'm saying is does it still leave some openness that if some things change with the SF 18, if they want to work through some of that, are we not, if we don't bring this in, are we stuck with what is in SF 118 for these ranchers? I mean, they seem to have this horrible fear of it, some of them. Am I clear kind of what I'm asking?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Strzok,
Go ahead.
I'm going to try and field a question in there, I'm sorry. Where my mind went was the efforts that I've been engaged in personally. The ability to work with the federal land manager, the BLM offices, both on, riparian health, both on water developments, going through the NEPA process, waiting for an archaeologist to come up so we can, run a water line, for goodness sake. I conducted my work while at Pathfinder Ranches to look at permit renewals. And part of permit renewal is to meet the standards and guidelines of the Bureau of Land Management. And those standards and guidelines aren't just rangeland related. There is a wildlife component that exists in standard and guidelines. And I looked at partnerships because, yes, you could participate in federal programs. Honestly, the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation was that non-federal match that occurred. That's opportunity. As I look at the Sweetwater Rocks and the land that Pathfinder holds there, spraying cheatgrass is the top 3 things that we should be doing on some of those lands right now. We were just waiting for indaziflam to be authorized to be utilized on BLM lands, and that only occurred last year. And so you ask, is there opportunity to move forward with all landowners should Senate File 118 be enacted? We believe so. We hope so. Our grant and aid program is wide open. And as I mentioned, we're going to continue to look at the Sweetwater Rocks because of the prime wild sheep habitat. But I'll echo these sounds. We don't want to shove it down someone's throat. That's why we've been through the process that we have the last 4 years.
Any follow-up? Okay. Any more questions? Yes, go ahead, Representative Otten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for you. With all of the work and riparian work, things that you've done with Pathfinder and others, is that through conservation easements?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, it is not. I looked at it as through the lens of where we had suspended AUMs, which when Pathfinder was acquired, there were some suspended AUMs, and it was my goal, how do we have better rangeland resource and not have suspended AUMs? And riparian health was primarily the culprit. We couldn't meet riparian health standards. And so through some exclosure fencing, some offsite water development, and some change of timing for grazing and working, that couldn't occur unless the BLM was on board as well. And so I had a different view of what working with the BLM was like. They were, in many ways, our biggest advocate, the more proactive we got to develop water and to fix some of our issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Representative Ottman.
Mr. Chairman, and not to beat a dead horse, but just to finalize, so these working groups that you're all involved with, along with the agency, are going to continue public meetings and work through that process to make sure that things are all done well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, absolutely. We're mandated to meet at least annually. We've been trying to meet more often. And, maybe we can work with you and those landowners to make sure that all the people who need to be represented are represented and that their representatives are attending those meetings.
And Mr. Chairman, just from Wyoming Wildlife Federations,
Go
it's
ahead.
the same. We stand absolutely, yes, we will be at that table and continue to work through.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the committee? Thank you very much for your time. Are there any other public testimonies that would like to be given?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockbrokers Association. I was one of the founding members of the Bighorn Domestic Sheep Working Group. I didn't realize until the previous speaker, it's been over 20 years ago. I know it's been a long time. And we've worked hard. We've had disagreements, but we've always kept up our communication and worked together. And I think we're proud of the fact that we developed the Wyoming Bighorn Domestic Sheep Working Plan, which has been recognized in many other states. And I've had states contact me and said, you wish we could do something like that. So we want to make that plan to continue to function. I'll be rather simplistic in terms of our position on this. And of course, I represent the cattle industry, although personally I'm a sheep producer. But the issues that are raised here with regards to the federal role do have potential implications beyond just the domestic sheep, although it's critically focused on them today. And our position has been from the beginning that because of experience we've had, I could give you examples, I won't get into details now, but with losing domestic sheep grazing on the Bighorn National Forest, on the Bridger Teton National Forest, a litigation that ensued on the Medicine Bow National Forest when litigants attempted to force the removal of domestic sheep because of the presence of bighorns. There are examples all over the West of this. A serious issue right now in Utah on the border with Wyoming, on the forest down there that is used by some Wyoming producers because of this same conflict. So our position is rather clear that we will not support a reintroduction or introduction to bighorn sheep in Sweetwater Rocks or anywhere else in the state where we don't have core native herds, absent adequate protections from the federal government for our grazing rights. And we view that adequate protection can only come through congressional action. We've had our Wyoming State BLM directors volunteered to give us a letter to say that, well, they won't remove domestic sheep because of the presence of bighorns. The problem with all of those is then they're subject to litigation by those who want domestic sheep removed or all livestock removed from the public lands, and we end up back in the same place. So the only fail-safe protection we see which can allow us to move forward in Wyoming is congressional action that says that the agencies, federal land agencies, shall not alter livestock grazing based on the presence of bighorn sheep that are introduced voluntarily under the state plan. And that would apply to Sweetwater Rocks. Our view is that the legislation shouldn't be Sweetwater Rocks specific. It needs to be broad enough to cover any introductions that would be done in Wyoming in the future under the auspices of the Wyoming Bighorn Sheep Working Group Plan, which we have in place today. Sweetwater Rocks happens to be the focal point right today, certainly, and that's where all of this is rising, but there could be future opportunities where that would be applicable as well. The other thing I would point out, we focused on, well, how many ranchers are directly impacted? But again, our experience with the federal land agencies is that they may not stop their activities just where we draw the boundary for the bighorn sheep area. They would be free to say, well, sheep have moved beyond that, and we're facing this some on the forest right now. Sheep have moved beyond that original area that was designated for reintroduction, so we need to provide broader protection. So we're going to eliminate the domestic sheep grazing on a broader scale than just those permits. The other thing is that while much of that area in Sweetwater Rocks is cattle permits today, and the economics of the two industries favor continuing cattle production, under federal law, your permits can be converted from one species to the other, and should future conditions be such that some of those people might want to go back into domestic sheep production, which many of them did historically, that this would become an obstacle to their ability to do that without these federal protections. So just based on our history working with this issue, we feel that once we can get federal protections, then we can have meaningful discussions, look at appropriate ways to do a reintroduction, and garner the support of the local landowners, hopefully to do that in Sweetwater Rocks or perhaps in other places. But lacking that federal protection, we will be resistant to moving forward with any reintroductions. It's just that straightforward. I've been in contact with our congressional delegation over the past year or so. I think that it's not easy, certainly. It might be a little easier now with the changes we've seen, but they are certainly committed to working with us to make that happen. As far as this particular legislation, to conclude, when this was passed last year, we were not particularly in favor of putting that date in of 2026. We felt it should be flexible based on when we reach the goal of appropriate federal legislation. The date was put in there, and now we're only less than a year away from that date, and we think it's very appropriate and actually necessary to remove that date as is proposed in this legislation. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Magagna. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Johnson.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this Sweetwater Rocks, and it's landlocked by the ranches around it, private land. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, I can't say with certainty that it's 100% so, but there's a lot of private land. I mean, it's private land and a mixture with federal grazing permits, but I certainly, without a map in front of me, couldn't respond with certainty to that question.
Okay, this was Bureau of Land Management brought it up, and it says it's only access is through, requires landowner permission. Is that, maybe we can have somebody else answer that?
Perhaps someone else answer. I would distinguish between whether it's landlocked immediately by being surrounded by private land or whether private land, crossing private land is necessary to access, and that's a little bit different, but I would defer to someone else on
yeah, that's
the
my
answer to
question.
that.
Yes, Matt, would you come forward and answer that question for us?
Mr. Chairman, my knowledge is of that defined by the Monteith study of the core native habitat or the predicted habitat of wild sheep. It is a 71,000 acre polygon. Of that 71,000, Over like 76% of it is BLM land. Roughly a quarter of it is private and state. I know I can speak for the 2 large ranches that Pathfinder Ranches holds now. You can access the public land, the BLM, through non-private roads, County Road or Highway 220. And so there's.
Thank you. Yeah, hold on just a minute. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Thank you, both of you. Are there any other public comments?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Just a little bit of background on this area. There's, from the information that I've received from some of the ranchers in the area, I think the number's 22, but I will say it's over 20 ranchers that have permits in that area and private land have the potential being impacted should bighorn sheep come in. The concern is that if bighorn sheep come into that area, that they will become a priority to the federal agency, and then domestic livestock grazing will get curtailed. These permits for the private ranchers are, just like any other federal permit, they're extremely important. That without those permits, they probably wouldn't, it's their summer grazing, they probably wouldn't stay in production. At that public meeting that was in Jeffrey City, this is what I heard. At this point, the Game and Fish Department has no plans on bringing in bighorn sheep. They're doing some background work, testing some animals and other herds to see if they're clean of pneumonia and other diseases that, are potentially lethal to the bighorn sheep. But a lot of this does not hinge on what the department wants to do. It hinges on what the Game and Fish Commission wants to do. Because if I understand the protocol right, the commission tells the department, what they need to be working on. So, there's a lot of concern out there. I believe there's maybe 2 landowners that want this. There's over 20 that don't because of the potential negative impact. And I'll go back a little bit to the wolf. They'll reintroduce them into this area, and it's been kind of somewhat insinuated they won't go very far, but we were also told with wolf that they won't leave Yellowstone. We've seen how well that's worked. I agree, we do need the federal protection. Without the federal protection, there's no way my organization can support a reintroduction in there. The potential negative impacts to the livestock industry. Granted, it is mostly cattle at this point. There is some sheep producers in the area, but without that federal protection, can't support a reintroduction. The question becomes, does this bill do what we want it to do? And to be quite honest, I think it does, but I'm not 100% sure. Perhaps a better solution would be that the state of Wyoming will not put it into the session laws of the old 118 that the state of Wyoming, who owns the animals, these animals belong to the state of Wyoming. The bighorn sheep belong to the state of Wyoming. They don't belong to the federal government. But perhaps a better solution would be to put it right into 118 that the state of Wyoming will not reintroduce bighorn sheep into this area until we have the federal assurance. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd sit for any questions you or the committee may have.
Any questions? I guess my question would be, Mr. Moline, so you're saying that this particular bill does not go into 118, and if not, then what do we need to do to make it correct?
Well, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I misspoke it. This bill does work on 118, it changes that effective date, removes those two lines. That's in the old 118 that's now in session laws. I think a better solution would be just be point blank. The state of Wyoming will not reintroduce sheep into any area until we have federal assurances that livestock grazing permits will not be negatively affected.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions for Mr. Moline? Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Moline, if we're looking to the federal government to lead in this, or do we need cooperating status to work with the federal government on this? You know, if I understood the director of the agency before, if we remove this, then it's off the table for them. So we lose that seat at the table, unless I've missed something in here.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, I don't know how to answer your question. You know, the agencies, the counties will still have the ability to work with the government. Is your question, would the Attorney General have standing? Is that your question?
No, Mr. Chairman, no, that's not it. My question is the input in developing this. You know, if I understood conversations earlier, that if we remove this date, don't hold their feet to the fire, basically, just let them come through and naturally issue this decree for the sheep, are we working off their perspective, or do we have any input into this other than what they would, I guess, bargaining power?
Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we have to remember these are federal lands. We always have input into their management. So the Game and Fish Commission, the Department of Ag, counties will still be able to have, I believe the word is cooperating agency status, to work with the agency. This, I kind of have to walk to a little fine line. Under the current administration, I think we would have perhaps better standing. We've seen what's happened under the previous administration with other resource management plans where the local input was not heeded at all. I think, you know, so that's where I go back to, I think we need to, because these animals are not federal animals. They belong to the state of Wyoming. That's why it would be better to go back and insert into the session law that was 118, that the state of Wyoming will not relocate their animals, the state of Wyoming's animals, the bighorn sheep, into an area without assurance from the federal government that they will not negatively impact livestock grazing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Mr. Kennedy, would you like to address the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. We support this legislation, and I will discuss a possible amendment here in moments. But first of all, regarding that earlier question, I'd remind you that current BLM policy, which would be unaffected by any cooperating agency status, penalizes livestock producers by putting conditions or permits to attain separation. And that's our concern and the reason that there is such a push for federal action. And to go further into the logistics of this, with this date that is in there now, we are essentially saying, well, we don't care about these 20-some producers on the ground that could be affected by that if the federal government doesn't act to protect those grazing rights by January 1st at the end of this year. And so are there venues where they could do that? Yes. They could possibly work on it in the Farm Bill. They could also work on it in the appropriations for the Department of Interior for BLM. But our ask would be that at least we delayed this another 2 years to give us time to work with our federal delegation to get this in place. And so if you have concerns and believe that somehow we're forcing the federal government to take action by having this date, I would ask that you give us adequate time to push for that and take it place, and at least move this date to 2028 rather than 2026 here in just a slightly bit more than 11 months. And with that, I'd welcome your questions.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, that brings up an interesting point that you just mentioned there. You know, we could postpone this date, but could you give me I guess, an update of what progress has made currently, if any, because of the previous administration?
Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to anything that took place during the previous either Congress or administration. And if you're asking me whether they'll get a farm bill done this next year, I'll just throw my hands in the air and say I don't know. Likewise, even with an appropriations bill, there'd be another venue for that. I consider that pretty likely that may come forward and that would be a good venue. But I think that we do need to give this at least enough time to allow us to push with the federal government to get these protections in place for these adjacent landowners and permittees.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
So you would entertain that, say, a 1 or 2 year further extension would be adequate to the existing bill?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest 2 years, and there's a reason for that. And we all know what it takes to introduce a bill during a budget session here as well. So I would ask for 2028 so that if necessary, we could take your body could take further action on this during the general session that would occur in 27.
Okay. I thought that by having the Game and Fish involved in this, that we were able to get rid of the date, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Mr. Chairman, we would be more than happy with that outcome, but I was suggesting a compromise here to make sure that we got this through with at least a delay in this to allow some time for us to work on the federal side of this, because that's really where the problem is. The problem isn't here at the state level. The problem is that current BLM policy will essentially mandate separation, whether those livestock are sheep or cattle that are on those adjacent permits. And we've seen how hard it is to get things to go further down the chain in the federal bureaucracy as well. So I don't know that we can count on a completely thorough house cleaning at the moment either.
Okay, and did you say you had a proposed amendment?
Mr. Chairman, my proposed amendment would be that you change, rather than delete this, change the date to 2028 rather than 2026.
Representative Ottman, could you respond to that?
It is not an amendment that we would support it reluctantly, I guess would be the best way to put it. We much prefer the language the way it is now, but we could support that delay.
Can you respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So really, it depends on the flavor of, or sentiment of this committee as to whether they see that the bill should go forward or not. And so I appreciate your testimony and everybody's, because this is a situation that affects so many. But I do appreciate your thought in that we can't be sure, and we've seen plenty of that, I know in my county too. So I appreciate that you are in support of the bill and that you have taken your time to voice that. And if the amendment needs to happen, that would be a compromise to allow us to work for a while.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any other public testimony waiting out there in the? I guess we have no Zoom participants. Okay, thank you. So what is the pleasure of the committee?
Move the bill.
I forgot to close public comment, so, okay. We have a motion to move the bill. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Representative Ottman seconds it. So do you have the person who made the motion and the second? Okay, thank you. So Representative Dalton. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna be a no on this bill. I see it as a lot of work put together through cooperating agencies, all of a sudden just thrown away and pretty much yielding to the federal government. I mean, we put that in there so it gives the state the ability to take the lead if the feds are what the feds are. And I don't think we should just give that up and put it in the hands of the feds and let's continue to go how things have been going now. Let's honor the work that's been put into this over the years. And I just think that all the work that we put into this last year of getting this bill to where it would go, and then all of a sudden just removing that, I don't think is the right way to go at this time. So I'm gonna be opposed to this bill.
Great. Are there any other comments? Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I tend to lean along that lines too. You know, we've seen recently on the headlines, the Rock Springs RMP, and that should be something that should occur in a relatively concise time. And it took 13 years to come out with a record of decision there that was just ignored everything of the public's input. So I think we need to be a little bit bolder here and perhaps push the federal government into recognizing what we're doing. You know, we seem to lose that in some of our other abilities here with, for instance, the grizzly and the infamous wolf. But I think we need to, I'm not in favor of this bill. I think we need to continue to apply the pressure.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Comments from the committee? Question's been called for. Could we have we can do this by voice vote, I guess. Or no, we can't either. Would you conduct the formal?
This is the vote
Process.
for House Bill 221 with no amendments. Representative Banks,
No.
Representative Davis.
No.
I have Representative Eklund, Representative Johnson,
No.
Representative Ottman,
Yes.
Representative Provenza,
No.
Representative Schmid,
No.
Representative Strzok,
No.
Chairman Winter.
No.
This bill does not pass by a vote of, I have to do math, 6-3. 6-3 in not passing the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So the bill has failed. We'll now move on to our next bill. I just want to remind everybody, we have to be back in session at 10 o'clock. So we'll open this up again and for this other bill and then see where we go to. So Our next bill for consideration will be House Bill 61. Okay, I'm sorry. It's House Bill 63. We do have our sponsor here. So when you get settled, would you state your name and go ahead and address the bill?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. It's good to see everybody. This morning, I bring to you House Bill 63 titled Working Animal Protection Act. To some of you, this bill might be familiar and might be new to others. This bill essentially solves the problem of the deterioration of our Western heritage. This legislation is intended to protect legal, law-abiding animal enterprise from the animal rights extremist agenda.
Representative Williams, would you state your name and?
Yep, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I did skip that step. Representative Rachel Rodriguez Williams from House District 50. My apologies.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So essentially, local bans on working animal industries destroy animal ownership, job opportunities, and revenue that animal exhibitors, carriage companies, and others bring to the state for citizens all to enjoy. This bill creates two new statutes in Title 15 and Title 18, and I'll walk you through the bill a bit. Basically, it provides protections for working animals. On page 1, it states that no city or town shall enact an ordinance or a policy that terminates, bans, or unduly restricts a person from using a working animal in lawful commerce or animal enterprise. This section supersedes any municipal ordinance or policy that conflicts with this section, but shall not supersede any zoning ordinance or any municipal code ordinance or policy that relates to public health or public safety. We go on to define what is a working animal. Essentially, it means a non-human animal that's used primarily for the purposes of performing a specific duty or function in commerce, or an animal enterprise including human service, legal hunting, agriculture, ranching, husbandry, transportation, education, competition, tourism, entertainment, or exhibition. The term does not include rabbits, llamas, cattle, swine, sheep, goats, poultry, or any other animal that's used primarily for the production of food or fiber. Furthermore, this also includes county zoning. And on page 4, I'll just stress that on the top, lines 1, this section shall not be interpreted to amend any other law that relates to animal care, public health, or public safety. I can tell you, committee, that last time I brought this bill, some folks got deep into the weeds with it and talked about snakes and puppy mills and so forth. And so this bill is very clear, and I'll just draw your attention that for the sake of argument, puppy mills are not explicitly illegal currently. And if a puppy mill met the definition of animal cruelty under current state statute, that would apply. So, and that statute's 63102. So again, this bill really does protect our, I'll call it our agritourism industry, our rodeos, horse carriages. It's a preventative bill. What we see happening across this nation is really counties and municipalities enacting ordinances that prohibit such activities. We see the deterioration of them. And these animal rights activist groups really target municipalities and counties to prohibit and these sort of activities. So essentially, this bill protects our Western heritage. It's a good little bill, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Representative Banks.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So just a quick question out of curiosity. So the term shall not include and cattle. So a lot of times there's cattle and stuff involved in rodeos. Is that going to be a loophole that somebody can find in and still try and erode that?
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, that's a policy decision of the committee if they want to omit that word or that species, that livestock. I get where you're headed with that. Again, the intention really is to protect the rodeo industry as well in our municipalities and in our counties. So again, a policy decision of the body.
Are there any more questions? Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, representative from the, never mind. There on line 2, page 3, if we were to remove that shall and put may or may not, would that be acceptable? And would that change the intent of this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, you said page 3, line what?
Page 3, line 2. The term shall, remove shall and put may or may not, because, you know, we've seen at chicken bingo, we've seen therapeutic goats. And I mean, there's a lot of things that livestock has expanded to, you know. Would you have any heartburn with that, I guess is my question.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, not necessarily. I see where you're headed. Yeah, there's, you know, yoga with goats and other types of activities that do go on that do incorporate use of these.
There are, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go
There
ahead.
are pet rabbits in the backyard and things like that. I just want to make sure that we can cover all those type of critters.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, again, a policy decision for the body. I'm open to it.
Okay. Are there any more questions for Representative Rodriguez Williams? Seeing none. Would Representative Davis, would you want to make an amendment to that or not?
Mr. Chairman, I think we have to move the bill first, don't we?
We have to get through public comment.
Yeah.
Chairman, you need to open up for public also.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Uh-oh. Can we close public comment?
Mr. Moline, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. Well, we haven't had some of the issues in Wyoming that other states have faced. I think it's proactive. You know, for my members, especially the sheepmen that are using guard dogs or border collies, my livestock, all livestock guys, not all, but a lot of the livestock guys use a herding dog, you know, border collies, blue heelers, et cetera. So I think this is proactive to not allow them to outlaw them. And to, I believe it was Representative Banks' comment on the top of page 3, it does have the words that, you know, any animal that's used in competition. So I believe that that would also protect the rodeo industry, the way I read it. You know, it's pretty broad, but, you know, I look at another state that's farther to the west that's outlawed rodeo, essentially. That I think having this at the state level, that you can't, the cities and the counties can't do it, I think is important. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit and take any questions you or the committee may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Moline. Are there any more testimonies out there? Please come forward. You'd state your name and who you represent.
I'm not sure that this is on. There we go. My name's Linda Burt, and I'm with the Wyoming Coalition for Animal Protection Group. I come to you today, and one of the first things, in opposition of this bill, one of the first things I do want to point out is specifically one of our big problems with this bill is that part of the bill, oops, let me go back here. The part of the bill that does state, no county shall enact any resolution, ordinance, or policy. That means this takes away all local control from your counties. So if you have a specific issue in your county, a problem, that means you cannot act on that problem as counties or as localities. That means you would have to come to the state, go through the process that we have here in terms of making legislation in order to address that problem. We've always said in Wyoming that those who are closest to people govern most and best. And that's kind of the thing that we're looking at here. While this states, while the name of this bill is Working Animals Protection Act, this is not a protection act for animals. This is an act that protects industry. And we don't have, it's been said already that this is a proactive bill. We don't have that problem in Wyoming. We haven't had issues or problems with extreme animal rights organizations. I think you can all see that that's been very true in our state and in our communities. One of the biggest testimonies last year, one of the most interesting testimonies last year about this bill came from the Cheyenne Frontier Days individual. They were opposed to this bill because they want it to be known when they're doing rodeo that they're doing it in a way that is humane and is entertainment and is not harmful to animals. They were opposed to this bill. There's no indication in any of our communities that rodeo is going to go away. We all know how important Cheyenne Frontier Days and some of the other rodeos are in Cody and different areas of our state. Rodeo is not going away, and no one's going to ban rodeo. The other thing that was mentioned in a testimony is that rodeo had been outlawed in a western state. This is simply not true. Some issues were brought up with rodeo people, and those issues were changed, and people were happy with the changes, and rodeo goes on in that state just like it does in many other states. I think this bill is unnecessary. It comes from well-funded out-of-state organizations that protect industries. One of the industries that those organizations protected specifically were puppy mills. Not something any of us want to see, or that localities want to be able to look at those issues within their counties, and if they have problems, they want to be able to address them. Again, I ask you not to support this bill. It's unnecessary. It does not protect animals, and it takes away local control from individuals. There will be no local control on these issues. If you have a problem, you must come to the state to get that issue addressed. Any questions, Chairman?
Thank you, Ms.
Committee.
Byrd. Are there any questions from the committee?
If any of you would like any information about some of the things I mentioned in regards to the organizations involved in my testimony, please let me know. I'd be happy to provide it to you.
Thank you, Ms. Byrd.
Thank you.
Are there any other testimonies out there?
Chairman, we have Zoom also. We have Zoom people also.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We'll have those Zoom testimonies right now then.
And this would be Donald.
Yes, welcome, Ms. Ms. O'Toole?
Chairman Winter, member of the Ag Committee, my name is Donald O'Toole, and thank you for an opportunity to speak on the bill. I'll try and keep it short. I live in Albany County. I think I am correct in saying this is the third time it's come before the Wyoming legislature, and there's good reasons it failed in the past. First, what are we trying to solve here? Last time around, and we heard some of the same rhetoric just now, we heard that the rationale was to protect Wyoming's Western heritage, specifically our rodeos. Yet rodeo is by state statute our state sport, and I don't see rodeos being shut down or overregulated anywhere near me. Indeed, I don't find the word rodeo in the bill. Second, and here's a quote, "The most effective, responsible, and responsive government is the government that is closest to the people." That is from the platform of a well-known political party in Wyoming. Yet here we are with a bill that weakens the ability of local government, particularly animal control personnel, to deal with people who don't know how to take care of their animals. Third, I have a question. What counts as a working animal? Because it's rather loosely defined in the bill. Let's say, for the purposes of argument, I have a breeding bitch. And for whatever reason, I decide to leave her out in minus 15-degree weather. Actually, the reason is I want to get an Irish skinful down at the Buck Bar in Laramie. Doesn't this bill allow me to ignore our local ordinance that animals have protection from the elements? Because I think it does. My last point is this. We have, and I'm a veterinarian, we have many good dog breeders in Wyoming. The best, in my experience, tend to be mom and pop operations, but we also have puppy mills. And let me try and define what I mean by puppy mills. These are businesses that emphasize quantity over quality, recurrent breeding of bitches, continuous confinement, limited human interaction, poor environmental enrichment, lousy husbandry, and minimal veterinary care. And they exist, and they are unregulated at a state level in Wyoming. To the extent to which they are controlled at present, it's by common sense local ordinances. And this bill undermines those ordinances. And I don't think that's wise. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll stand for any questions.
Yes, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. O'Toole? Seeing none, I appreciate your testimony, and we'll move forward to
Mr. Anderson. I believe Madhu, I'm not sure how to say this person's name, but Anderson would be the one that would testify next.
Mr. Anderson?
It's on the out.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Madhu Anderson. I'm a resident of Wyoming and a member of Wyoming Wildlife Protection Group. I urge you to vote no on HB 0063, the Working Animal Protection Act, for several reasons. I believe this bill is unnecessary as the local authorities are as I believe the local authorities are more knowledgeable and better suited to make decisions on local issues. There are several reasons I oppose this bill, and a few of them are one of them is there is minimal evidence that Wyoming's rodeo industry is threatened by animal rights activism. If this were a genuine concern, it is surprising that it's not addressed directly in the bill's language. Also, other questions comes into my mind is HB 0063 raises these questions that does a pregnant dog whose puppies could be sold qualify as a working animal, or is an intact male dog available for breeding considered a working animal? Would service animals, hunting dogs, or guard dogs fall under this definition? If a community attempts to ban the sale of commercially bred pets in pet stores to support rescues, would this bill nullify this ordinance? For these reasons, I request you to vote no on HB 0063. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee for Ms. Anderson? Seeing none, thank you very much for your attendance to this meeting.
Thank you, Chairman.
Is,
And you need to close public testimony.
okay. Mr. Secretary, the other Zoom participant did not show up.
They declined.
Okay, thank you. We will close public comment at this time. So what is the pleasure of the committee? Do we have a second? It's been moved and seconded. Moved by whom? Who moved it? Representative Strzok and seconded by Representative Davis. Do you have any, would you like to discuss the bill, committee?
No discussion, question.
Okay. The question's been called for. We'll have the vote taken now if you are ready.
We're voting on House Bill 63 with no amendments. Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
I have Representative Eklund. Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Ottman.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
No.
Representative Schmid.
Aye.
Representative Strzok.
Aye.
Chairman Winter.
Aye.
The vote is 8-1 to pass.
Okay, the bill is passed by a vote of 8-1. Thank you, committee and participants from the audience. I guess we'll just close this meeting.